All right, let's kick things off with a question. What year did the Magna Carta get signed? Now, you might know this off the top of your head, you might not. Either way, it's a question with one single fact-based answer.
See, a question like that, it's really just a memory test. There's one correct answer. It's 12:15, by the way, and you can find it in about 5 seconds on your phone. It's a closed loop. But what if we flip the script and asked a totally different kind of question?
Okay, now let's try this one on for size. Why was the Magna Carta ineffective in the short term but foundational for democracy in the long term? Whoa, all of a sudden we're not just looking for a date, are we? This is the start of a real investigation. And that is the key difference. This second question, it sparks real inquiry. You can't just Google it. It demands that you think, analyze, compare things, and actually build an argument. And that right there is the difference between a question that just tests you and a question that actually teaches you.
And that's exactly what we're going to get into today. The art and science of designing powerful questions. We're going to break down how the right question can take learning from just passively listening to being an active, engaging journey of discovery.
So first up, the why. Why does this matter so much? Well, to really get the power of a great question, you have to stop seeing it as just a prompt. It's way more than that. It's a key piece of the entire learning environment.
And what do we mean by learning environment? Well, think of it as the whole system that's set up to help students learn on their own. To explore, to develop their skills, to solve problems for themselves. The whole point is to build that independence, that autonomy.
So inside this big system, the question has one absolutely critical job. It's the goalpost. It gives students a super clear target to aim for. It tells them exactly what they're trying to achieve through all their work. You could say it's like the X on a treasure map. It shows them where to dig.
All right, so we've established that questions are a big deal. But what makes a question great? Let's dive into the what and really dissect the anatomy of a question that truly engages.
It turns out there are 6 core principles. And if you can get these 6 things right, you'll be crafting questions that don't just get an answer, but that actually inspire real thinking.
Okay, so let's walk through them. A great question has to be inquiry-based, meaning it leads to new discoveries, not just rehashing old facts. It's got to be essential, connecting to the core way a real historian or scientist thinks. It has to be open-ended. Yep, that means you can't just Google the answer. It also needs to be guiding, gently pointing students in the right direction for their work. It has to be motivating, sparking their curiosity and making the expectations clear. And finally, it needs to be sustainable. This isn't a 5-minute problem. It's something they can dig into and wrestle with over time.
So that's the theory, the what. But how do you actually do it? Let's get super practical now and look at 3 methods you can use to start crafting these amazing questions yourself.
Method number 1 is just beautifully simple. Think backwards. Seriously, don't start with the question, start with the goal. What's the destination you want your students to get to?
So here's how it works. First, you have to define the outcome. What exactly do you want a student to be able to do or understand when all is said and done? Is it a skill they need to master? A concept they need to grasp? Once you've got that final product in your mind, then, and only then, do you design the question that leads them straight to it. It makes that outcome feel like the natural, logical end of their journey. Okay, method number 2 is all about putting on a different hat. To ask a truly essential question, you need to stop thinking like a teacher and start thinking like an expert in the field. So, don't ask, what does a student need to know? Instead, ask, what would a professional actually do?
And this is such a huge mindset shift, right? You're moving beyond just transferring facts, and instead you're modeling an entire way of thinking. The goal is to get students to step into the shoes of that historian or that scientist and see the problem through their eyes. And you can see how this changes the whole game. A typical student question is about the what and the who. They're looking to a known fact. But an expert, they're focused on the how and the why. They want to explore how things work, to understand the relationships between ideas. When you start designing your questions from that expert mindset, you automatically crank up the level of thinking. And our third and final method really ties it all together by linking the question directly to the action. It's all about the verb, the specific thing you want students to do. That action word becomes the blueprint for your entire question.
This one's super direct. So if you want students to, say, compare and contrast, your question should start with something like, which is more effective, or what are the key differences, right? If you want them to analyze with evidence, the question has to ask them to use that evidence, like, based on the data, explain. And if you want them to create or synthesize something new, The question has to be a challenge, like, how could you design a solution for? See? The action you want dictates the words you use. It's that simple.
Okay, so let's recap the big ideas here. First, a question is never just a question. It's the engine driving the entire learning environment. Second, the really great questions, they're inquiry-based, essential, open-ended, guiding, motivating, and sustainable. And third, you can build them yourself by working backward from the goal, thinking like an expert, or designing them straight from the activity. And so, we'll leave you with one final question to think about. In your next class, your next team meeting, heck, even your next dinner conversation, what is one question you can ask this week to transform passive listening into active, genuine inquiry? Because at the end of the day, the right question isn't the end of the conversation, it's the beginning of real learning.